Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts podcast. My name's Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs, and try to do all those things more responsibly. For the second episode, I want to talk about the American election, the 2020 election that we've all been waiting for. And I don't really want to talk about the results of the election or the things that led up to those things. I more want to talk about the emotional responses and the way that we participate in that system. I'm kind of nervous to talk about this political stuff because it is so emotional and divisive, but I do want to just unpack all of it and just think through all of it because I want to find a way to talk about it better. And I'll be straight with you, I did not do a lot of planning for this video, so this could go off the rails very quickly, but I don't know, I just wanted to get some of the thoughts out of my head and try not to be too structured with it, so bear with me as I unload about everything going on. So I know that this is being released after the election, but I'm recording this on election day, so I don't know the results. I haven't really looked at any of the news, so I'm sort of blind to all of that, and I know that by the time this comes out, we will already know who the president is, most likely, and we'll have those questions settled. But I want to kind of talk about this from a blind perspective as I move forward without having any real idea of what the country is moving towards with this new announcement of who will be running our country for the next 4 years. So just so you know, anything I say today will not be impacted by the results of that. So I'm always very interested and engaged when election seasons come. I was not always that way, but I think because of the way that my deconstruction happened and how significant an election was in the shift of the way that I saw how I should come to beliefs and how to engage in conversations with that, it becomes very relevant to me. But I will be honest, this election has slowly but surely made it a little more difficult to want to engage. I've sort of checked out and felt very frustrated with the way that things have been playing with the election. So the fact that it's finally here and we will be out of the woods and not talking about this anymore is very exciting to me. But I do think it constantly raises questions in my head of how we go about this and what we're doing to better prepare and look towards our responsibility in the election process and what we're doing as citizens to think about the choices we're making in our voting seasons and the way that impacts our societies, not just on a governmental policy level, but also a social community level. I think a lot of people in my generation grew up with the idea that the things we don't talk about are politics and religion. And where I stand now, I think those are some of the most important things we can talk about. And while it's not always the thing that we should talk about, there are times where we need to talk about that to get to the bottom of the truth. And so often we were told, don't talk about those things, that we have no idea how to talk about them in a productive way. And while so many people are starting to realize that these are things we actually need to talk about, we are not equipped at all to know how to talk about those helpfully. And I think that's a big part of what's causing a lot of the chaos. I said in my first podcast that I do not like politics, and that is true. I dislike a lot of what politics is, but I do enjoy politics when I started thinking about the morality and the philosophy that goes under some of those things. And I think those conversations are super important to have. I think it gets us closer to really unpacking these attempts to try and make our societies better and more equitable. But I don't think a lot of the conversation that happened around politics are really about getting those underpinnings and trying to work together to get closer to something, it's placed in a situation that's more them against us, winning and losing, and dying to a party line. Now, I think there are certain narratives that are spun that get us to attach those moral implications onto these certain parties. And it happens on all fronts. This is not a single party issue. But I don't always think that those things are done with the best intentions. And I don't even want to go that far. I think that there are good intentions in that, but it becomes more of a fear of, if we don't win and we don't create this animosity against others, the other side's going to ruin everything for the country. And it just becomes a circus. And we start not seeing individuals as people with emotions and complicated, moral, calculating brains, but as friend or foe. I know that with COVID happening this year and everything getting shut down, it's created a lot of negative energy. I always say it's like this crucible where you had all of these emotions and issues that were there, but then we shut everything down, and now it's just heating up and showing those things more aggressively. And it's definitely impacted the way that we are interacting with each other on emotional level, with these questions about who we're going to vote for and where the direction of our country should go. Now, I want to say right off the bat, I am a big believer in the responsibility of voting. I think it's important because I have seen firsthand that our votes do matter and they impact the lives of the people around us. And so because we have a choice and a voice in the decision, we should take that with responsibility. However, the conversations that I'm seeing about voting don't seem to be taking that very seriously. So when we talk about voting, it's often placed in this moral dichotomy that feels like nobody can win, especially in the last couple of elections when there has been a sense that maybe you're not voting for a candidate, but voting against one and for a party line versus another, where it's not really in support of the person who's running, but trying to run away from the opponent because they're so dangerous. If you're voting for one of the two main platforms, you have all of these moral implications why you're a good or bad person, depending on which side you're on. If you're voting for an independent candidate, you're throwing away your vote because they can't actually win. So that's an irresponsible way to vote. And if you don't vote at all, you're spitting in the face of the right that's given to you, and you should be ashamed that you don't respect that right. And I think it's just a terrible way to kind of look at all of these things. So I think underneath all of this, and something we need to acknowledge, that no matter where we lie on the political spectrum, I think the goal of most people with whatever they hold to be true and think is the way that the country should move is based on this belief that that policy they're standing for is there to serve us and help the people in their communities. Now, of course, I'm not naive enough to think that there aren't bad actors and people who are only looking out for their best interests. But I think if we really look down to the core of it and we look at the people, our neighbors, our friends, and think about the way that they hold their beliefs, they're trying to do the right thing. And I think starting from that perspective does make it a lot easier to unpack and get through some of this emotional stuff that stops us from having civil conversations, because it can be really hard to have a conversation about something that's so sensitive. I think for so many people, politics is built at the core of who they are, and by criticizing a political belief, they feel as though you're criticizing the core of who they are. Now, I think there's a lot of danger to be had in that sort of perspective, but knowing that can help us to unpack why there might be this divisiveness. And I think a lot of the media sources work to get us to think that way. They want us to feel that sense. Um, I'm pretty cynical when it comes to media and the way that it's produced. I think a lot of that comes from being a filmmaker myself and knowing how the way that you can cut something, the way that you can present information can psychologically change and manipulate the way a person views something. And so it can really get at me to see a lot of these tricks that are happening to manipulate people. And it, it gets really overwhelming, especially when I do want to see more civil conversations come about. You know, we live in an age where we have more free information at our fingertips than ever before. Yet I don't think we always take that knowledge with the responsibility it deserves. And that especially goes into the way we think about politics. There all of this information that's being fed into our systems. Yet for a lot of us, we've gotten into this complacent attitude where we're consuming that without even thinking about it. When we start to consume without thinking, it starts to rewire our brains without our consent, and we start having these beliefs that when we really start poking at them might not have as strong a justification as we originally thought. And there's sort of two ways that I see a lot of people respond to this. It's either we double down and we shut down the dissent and we don't talk about it, or we throw everything out and switch to the other team. And to me, it seems like it should make some sense that there's some middle ground here. There's so much media on our Facebook feeds, on our televisions, on the radio that are constantly reminding us of the importance of these things and trying to get us to buy into the narrative that we need to stay informed nonstop 24/7 if we're ever going to have a clear understanding of what's going on. And I think that makes it very difficult and stressful and often can leave us more confused than we were before. The information that we get about these laws are needlessly confusing, and there's so much conflicting information that's flying at us that it almost seems impossible to really get our minds around what's really going on here and how do I vote responsibly. So when we find ourselves identifying with anything, there's a lot of ways that we come to those beliefs. Sometimes it's the thing that we've always known, and that's why we believe it's true. Sometimes it's based on our experience and what we've experienced within communities that hold those same ideologies, and that gives us an influence on what we choose and where we decide to identify. And sometimes it's evidential, where we're just looking straight at the facts or what we think are facts and trying to build that. I don't think any of them are isolated. I think it's all a mixture of many different factors. There's emotional and intellectual reasons why we believe anything and stand for anything. And we have to factor all of those things in when we think about what we personally believe. But just because we personally believe something's true doesn't make that ultimately true. And so how do we get outside of this cloud and this, confirmation bias of just listening to the things that tell us what we want to hear and holding those to be true? How do we come to talk more productively with those who think differently than us and not othering people? Because that's happening all over the map. And it makes it really difficult to actually get to the core of what is happening and how we can practically help people. I'm trying to speak very carefully here because I think that there is a lot of things that we talk about with confidence that maybe we should be a little less confident about because we think we know, yet things are much more complicated and nuanced than we'll ever imagine. And I don't think big problems come with simple solutions. When it comes to what I want to believe is true as far as political. I don't want something that makes me feel like I'm doing good. I want something that's practically going to do so and move our communities forward. And it's complicated to understand what that is. And I think it starts with ourselves being a little more willing to suspend our judgment and be less confident and be willing and open to being proven wrong. Because right now it just seems that there's a lot of doubling down and committing just because that's our team and we got to win no matter what. I've seen a lot of people using political ideologies as a signal of someone's moral character and helping uncover who is on the right side or the wrong side of history. It does really discourage me to see all of these Facebook profiles or, sweeping declarations that if you believe such and such an opinion, you should just go ahead and unfriend me, because I think that's the most unhelpful thing that you can do. If we really want to get to the bottom of what is right and what is wrong, we can't isolate ourselves with people who only think the same as us. We really have to give someone a chance to unpack their best representation of why they think the opposing idea is true. And not in this straw man version of the weakest type of the argument, but really trying to find the best side of that argument and working together to try and uncover those things. If we approach everything in that way, I just imagine that things could be a lot more positive, because it's not about dying to a party line. It's about really thinking through the issues and talking about things in a really pragmatic way that gets us closer to helping others. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to agree. You can still have these conversations and end up on opposite sides of the line. But at least we're talking and giving people enough respect as human beings to say that even though they have a different opinion than you, they still are valuable, and they may have some information that you don't and might have a good reason to dissent from what you believe. And there's something to the fact that if we are ever going to progress in a good way, in a way that's beneficial, we need to be able to have these political fights in a positive way that doesn't result in shunning. I once had a friend who I reached out to during the 2016 election as I was processing through things. And for a while, we had really friendly conversations. But at one point, I made the statement that made him decide he no longer wanted to engage with me. And that statement was that I thought Trump might actually make America great. Now, he never let me explain what I meant by that. And it always frustrated me, because I think if he had taken the time to listen, he would have realized that I wasn't sitting supporting Trump, saying that I believed so quickly that everything he would do in the future was going to be golden and perfect, because that was not my perspective. But what I was seeing was the change in myself and the change in others. Look at what his winning has done in my life. And I'm looking at the things that are happening in other people's lives. And for the first time, I'm seeing people awake and engaged and vocal. And while I'll admit there's a lot of negative things that came from all of that, I think there's a lot more positive that came from that too. And it's really started to get people out of this complacent consumerism where we're just taking in the narratives and letting that dictate what we think. And I think that's a good thing if honed in the right direction. Now, there's a lot of that isn't honed in the right direction, and it is what creates more of this chaos. But I do believe that whatever happens in this election, there could be more of a chance to continue to be awake and think more critically and engage better in those conversations and the way we approach the future of our country and how we see ourselves participating in that. I genuinely enjoy listening to people talk from all sides of the political spectrum because I think it really opens my mind and stops making me complacent in what I believe and really look at the nuances and get the strongest arguments to really figure out how is this working in practice and what may I be missing in my perspective of those things. And it discourages me to see so many people who don't want to embrace that. And although I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with finding places where you can feel comfortable and have people who think the same way that you do, I think that can also help strengthen what you believe. But that on its own can make you weak. You know, right now I think there's just so much pressure on who's going to be president and how that's going to affect our country. And if this person gets in, we're going to, like, the world is going to change and fall apart. I think whoever ends up being president is going to make an effect on the country. I think that most of politics, the community level is much more important than who's president. Yet we don't really think about our local laws in the way that we think about the person at the top. And I think that's a huge problem in really creating some of this mess. And I wish that there was a way that we could unpack those things in a more helpful way. And I don't have the answers for that, but that's a big frustration for me for this election and how I'm seeing everything play out. And I don't know. I hope that whatever happens, this moves forward. I know that there's going to be a lot more division and people are still going to be people and we're going to form our tribes and find ways to discredit the other. But I guess I can only start with myself and look at what I can do to be a better participant in this. And hopefully I attract and am drawn to people who want the same thing. Well, thank you for listening. I don't know if any of this made any coherent sense or made any impact, but I know hopefully you get something out of it. And if there was something that I said that made you think, or you know, you have something to respond to, please just leave that in the comments. I'd love to engage and continue this conversation because I don't think it's over. I think I think a lot of the hype will fade away after things sort of settle down, but I do think that there needs to be more than just talk every 4 years about politics and policies in a more serious way. So hopefully we can find a better way to do that, and I'd love help to try to figure that out because I don't have all the answers, and I think I get more frustrated than I should, and I get caught up in this cycle and allow it to keep me disengaged, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to get caught in the cycle, and I do want to take these questions seriously and move forward in a better way. So like I said, just leave a comment if you're interested, and with that, I guess I'll close. Like always, we will close with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.